I am going to entitle my presentation, The Biggest Fool. The Biggest Fool. Fool. The biggest fool. Right? I'm going to start by asking a question to everybody. Let me pick on some people. Anton, you are right in front of me. Who would you say a fool is?
Someone that does foolish things. Someone that does things that is not.
Somebody who does foolish things.
Things that doesn't make sense.
Things that don't make sense. All right, I agree with you. Jordan, who do you say a fool is?
Somebody lacking common sense.
Somebody who lacks common sense. All right, Cade, who do you say a fool is?
Someone who doesn't know a lot of things.
All right, so an ignorant person. You are correct. All of your answers are correct so far, right? In fact, many people can fit into the category of fool. There's a saying that a fool and his money are soon parted, right? In other words, a person who doesn't know how to spend and budget properly is a fool. There's a saying that he who knows not and knows not that he knows not is a fool. So a person who thinks he knows a lot but really doesn't know anything is a fool also. The Bible says that a man who consorts with a loose woman is a fool. If you take up a woman who is carefree and everybody knows about her, you're a fool. The Bible says a person who talks too much is a fool. So there are many definitions for fool. Many kinds of people fit into that category. But I want to show you from the Bible this morning who I think the biggest fool is. Right? And I'm going to go to Psalm chapter 14 and verse 1. And I'm going to read to you who the biggest fool of all is. This is what it says simply. It says, the fool had said in his heart, there is no God. The biggest fool. There is no God. Now there are two ways to say there is no God, right? Some people say it verbally. Atheism is one of the fastest growing movements in the world today. More and more people are becoming atheists, claim that they don't believe in God and that there's no God. And some of the most famous people who everybody looks up to and respects are the ones who are pushing this. I was looking on the internet this week at some people who don't believe in God, and some of them were actually people I used to like. They were actually people I used to respect. For example, Brad Pitt. Well, the older ones might not know, but I'm sure all the younger people in here know who Brad Pitt is. Famous actor. Angelina Jolie. Woody Harrison. I heard some people exclaiming in surprise because you didn't even know that some of these people don't believe in God. They are so famous. Bruce Willis. I met him when I was in Turks. Daniel Radcliffe. He's the one who acts Harry Potter. Morgan Freeman. Morgan Freeman is a black man who I used to respect and look. In fact, he has come in movies where he has acted the role of God. He doesn't believe in God. Johnny Depp, Kathy Griffin, Zac Efron, Keanu Reeves. He's the one who acted the Matrix. All of these people have openly, verbally declared that there is no God. And millions of people look up to these people. So saying there is no God verbally is one way to show that you're a fool. Look at what some of these people have said. Some of the most famous people in history. This man named Peter Atkins, he was a British chemist. He says, it is not possible to be intellectually honest and believe in gods. And it is not possible to believe in gods and be a true scientist. That is what he one of the smartest, quote-unquote, men in history. That is what he says about God. This one named Andrew Carnegie, another very famous one. He says, I don't believe in God. My God is patriotism. Teach a man to be a good citizen and you have solved the problem of life. So in his opinion, all the problems you see around us, God can't solve them. There's nothing called God. If you teach people to be good patriots, that will solve all the problems. Benjamin Franklin. I respected him as well. The way to see by faith is to shut the eye of reason. So in other words, if you have faith in God, you have shut reason. You have closed off reason. This one named Clarence Darrow, he was a famous American lawyer. He says, I don't believe in God because I don't believe in Mother Goose. So in other words, believing in God is equivalent to believing in Mother Goose. Right? Some of the most famous people, but the biggest fools. Ernest Hemingway, he was a famous writer and actor. He says, all thinking men are atheists. All thinking men. Once you have a brain, you are an atheist. So if you believe in God, it means you are not a thinking person. Christopher Hitchens, an American journalist. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him will believe in anything. I'll read one more. Émile Zola, a French novelist. Civilization will not attain its perfection until the last stone from the last church falls on the last priest. Well, a part of that might be true. But what he's saying is that we will not be a completely civilized world until everything that pertains to religion falls. That is what he's saying, right? So all of these famous, popular, well-respected people, who everybody looks up to and admires and respects, they have come out and verbally declared that they don't believe that there is a God. Now the Bible says it is a fool who says there is no God. And I want to look at this set of people now. The Bible says what the fool says it in his heart. Because you see, it's possible to say it verbally and everybody knows what you believe. There is a more subtle class of people who say it in their heart. Because you see, it's possible to say you believe in God with your mouth. But in your heart, you say, I don't believe in God. How? You know how, Ashley? It is by living your life as if there is no God. It is by making your own decisions and doing things your own way and ignoring the fact that there is somebody greater than you who you should acknowledge. It is by adopting a principle in your lifestyle that says, I am the boss of my own life. So there are two types of people who say there is no God. There's the one who says it with their mouth, and the one who might not necessarily say it verbally, but their lifestyle says it. Even though some of them might say with their mouth, I'm a Christian, I go to church every week. But your life says, I am the boss of my own life. The Bible says both categories of people, well, it doesn't say the ones with their mouth, but we already understand that, are fools. Fools. Now I ask myself the question, why is it that it is so important for some of these people to say there is no God? Why is it so important? You know why? If you say there is no God, then I get up tomorrow and I say I feel like a female. I can change my gender because there's nobody I need to be accountable to. I can say I choose to love a man because there's nobody I'm accountable to. I can say I choose to marry a dog because there's nobody I'm accountable to. I choose to spend my money the way I want to spend it, and I choose to do what I want with my own life because there's no God. It's the easy way out. It's an excuse they make because they want to be the governors and the bosses and the rulers of their own lives. That's the only reason. Because as Paul says in Romans, he says the invisible things that, I'm not quoting it exactly, but what he's saying is that everything that is around you that you see tells you incontrovertibly and clearly that somebody must have made these things. So for you to deny that and to live your life the way you want, it is a deliberate effort to shut out that person so that you can be your own boss. Why are these people fools? Why does the Bible refer to them as fools? You know why? There is only one being in the entire universe that is truly wise. There are other beings around, maybe angels, maybe people like Einstein who have had little snippets of information that have been revealed to their dark minds. There's only one source of true wisdom in the universe. You know, I was thinking this morning that it's not possible. Do you know that God cannot learn anything? You know that it's impossible for God to learn anything? He can't, because he already knows everything. We can learn. We learn every day. Angels can learn. The watchers and the holy ones can learn. There's one being in the universe who can't learn. It's impossible. He can't discover anything new. Imagine that. So there's one person who is all wise. There's one person who is good. Do you know that it's not possible for God to improve and get better in any way? He's already perfect goodness. He's already perfect love. He is the only possible way that any being in the universe can truly succeed. And you know what the man who says there is no God does? He turns away from that one person who is only good, only love, only wisdom, only true. And he says, I will achieve happiness on my own, by myself. How is that possible? How can I turn away from the only source of light to find light? How can I turn away from the only source of good to find good? That is what the fool does. And that is why he is the biggest fool. Because it is impossible to succeed in any way in this universe unless you are connected to the source. And so, anybody who declares with his mouth or with his heart that there is no God, he is not only a fool, he is the biggest fool. The biggest fool. You know, all the things that my parents used to say to me as a child growing up, and that I used to resent, and I used to rebel against, and I used to feel unhappy about. You know that now I'm 43 years old. You know what? All of those things I can see why they used to say them. Especially now that I have a son. Right? Growing up, I used to see some of my friends and relatives, every time holiday came around, they would be allowed to go and spend time with their other relatives or with their other friends. And our parents refused to let us go, to spend holiday anywhere. And I couldn't understand it. I couldn't accept it. I couldn't feel happy about it. Now I understand why. Right? Now I understand, because I've seen situations where that has happened and the children go away and learn things they never learned at home. And are influenced in a way they would have never been influenced at home. There are certain cartoons we couldn't watch, and I used to see my other peers watching them, and I couldn't understand why. Because they knew much more than I did. And you turn away from the one who knows everything, to live your own life. Listen, the most powerful being in the universe other than God and his son was Lucifer. The Bible says he was perfect in all his ways. He was perfect. And the minute he turned away from God, you know what happened? He became an abomination. The Bible says all the nations that look at you marvel at you. They can't believe you have become such a horrible, awful thing from what you were. Right? You turn away from the parent who knows everything to live your own life. And what happens? You end up being a complete and utter failure under this grace. And so, it is folly of the highest level to try to live your life without this person. And what does the verse say? I never read all of the verse. It says, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. But what happens automatically when you say that? The minute that you turn away from God and you start to try to live your own life. Look what the second part of the verse says. It says, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Next part of the verse. They are corrupt. They have done abominable works. Automatically and instinctively, you turn away from God, you say there is no God. Abominable works start to take over your life. It is inevitable. One source of good, you turn away from it to do good. It is impossible. Abominable works, the Bible says. And doesn't Paul say the same thing in Romans chapter 1? Same thing he says. Look at, well, you don't need to look at it. I'll read it. Look at Romans chapter. We all know the verse. We have quoted from it many times. Romans chapter 1. I'm going to read verse 21 and 22. It says, because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God. Neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish, there's that word again. Their foolish heart was darkened. So the Bible is agreeing with what I'm saying here. Anybody who does not acknowledge God in their hearts and in their lives and verbally, you're a fool. The Bible says because they did not glorify God, their foolish hearts were darkened. And look what the next verse says now. Professing themselves to be wise, they became what? Fools. Professing that they know everything and they know scientifically they can prove that there's no God and they can live their lives by patriotism and good citizenship and educating themselves. The Bible says they became fools. And I find it ironic. And I find it true that all of these people in the world today who are the wisest and the most educated, they are the ones who always seem to turn to atheism. They are the ones who always seem to be pushing homosexuality and pushing transgenderism and pushing these abominable things. I was watching Piers Morgan's show. Piers Morgan is this British talk show host, and he had some transgenders on the show. And of course, when they have these people on, they have the experts sitting in the corner, psychologists. And I don't agree with Piers Morgan because he backs the LGBTQ movement 100%. But on this occasion, I was in agreement with him because he was saying to these transgender people, they're allowed to adopt children. And one of them had a child. The child was 2 years old. And Piers Morgan was saying, what gender is the child? Now the trans man, I don't even know if it was a man or a woman. Right? It was a female-looking person with a very deep male voice. Ashim. Piers Morgan was saying to the person, what gender is the child? The transgender said, we're not going to give the child any gender. When the child is about 5 or 6, we'll allow them. Now, they don't refer to the child as he or she. They refer to it as them. And they don't refer to the baby as baby. They refer to it as a baby. Theyybie. Right? Because if you say him or her, that's discrimination. So they refer to it as they or them. And so the person said, we are going to allow our baby to choose their gender when they are 5 or 6. One person they are referring to, they or them. Right? Piers Morgan said, that's ridiculous. How can a 6 or 5-year-old child choose their gender? Right? Was she or he born with a penis or a vagina? We're not going to tell them what gender they are supposed to be. Organs are not what determine your gender. It is who you feel to be inside. Pierre said that's ridiculous. You need to tell the child his or her gender. A 6-year-old child can't choose what gender he or she is. The psychologists now, the learned wise one who professed to be wise, interjected to inform peers that you cannot tell a child his or her gender because that is childism. Now, I know you're wondering what is childism, right? When you discriminate against a person because of their race, that's racism. You discriminate against somebody because of their age, that's ageism. You discriminate against somebody because of their sex, that's sexism. Now, for you to tell a child of 5 or 6 their gender, that is discriminating against the child and not allowing him to make his or her own choice. So that is childism. It's a new term that the learned psychologists have come up with today to tell you that to do that to a child is child abuse. So you must allow the child to choose their own gender, a 5 or 6-year-old child. Right? I mean, absolute and utter madness and insanity. But it just shows you that the Bible cannot be wrong. The Bible says when they reject God and they turn away from God, automatically they do abominable things. What does Paul say here in Romans chapter 1 verse 28? He says, even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to what? To a reprobate mind. to do those things which are not convenient. It's not just homosexuality. There are 100 genders. Think about this and allow your mind to wrap around this. Psychologists have now come up with 100 genders that you can possibly be. Don't even ask me to try to explain that. The Bible says God made male and female. Psychologists say that's rubbish. It's 100. Right? The Bible God made one sexuality, which is heterosexuality. You know how many sexualities there are now? 30. Right? You can be bisexual, you can be transsexual, you can be pansexual. 30 of them. Professing to be wise, the Bible says they became fools. Biggest fools. And it all happens when you deny God verbally or in your heart. And so, understanding this helped me to understand a little better. I'm trying to go as fast as possible, so I'm cutting out what needs to be cut out. Understanding this helped me to understand a little better why God operated the way he operated in the Old Testament. It helped me to get a little clarity, right? In the Old Testament, if you committed certain sins, God said you should be killed. On the other hand, he says if you obey my laws and you follow me and you do what I say you should do, he promised that you would be successful and I will be your God and you would have everything to your heart's desire, right? And I used to wonder as a child growing up why God was so hard. Why he was so exacting. But as we have already established, you know what? When you turn away from God, automatically and immediately and inevitably, only abomination exists. The whole universe would perish in darkness and abomination if they turned away from God today. The whole universe. The only hope we have is to stay connected to the source. Now, what God did in the Old Testament, God was painting a picture to point to a great truth in the future. Let me ask you a question. What is the greatest sin? What is the greatest sin that the universe can commit? Anybody in the universe? I know Daddy knows what I'm talking about, but let me see if anybody else can get it. The greatest sin is separation from God. In fact, that is what sin is. It's separation from God, right? The minute you separate from God, every other category of sin falls under that one sin. Now, what was the type of that in the Old Testament? What was the type of that in the Old Testament? Separation from God. What was the type of it? Breaking the law. Breaking the law was a type of separation from God. And so when you broke certain laws, what did God say should happen to you? You should be killed. He was trying to teach a vital lesson. Was God saying, because you disobey me, I am angry and I want you to die? No. And I understood it better. I'm going to use an illustration to see if I can break down to you what I understand God to be doing, what I understood him to be doing, right? I always use this school I used to teach as an example, but it's where I had my greatest experiences, so you will bear with me. Now, across the road from the school I used to teach, there was a well. An old well was in the bushes. It was about 20 feet deep and it had water in it. Now, one day I found out that the boys from my class, whenever it was break time or lunchtime, you know what they were doing? They were sneaking across the street and they were gambling. They were gambling money, betting each other. Anybody who could jump from one end of the well over to the other side would get a certain amount of money. Right? The well had water in it, and there were big rocks at the bottom of it. When I found out, now imagine I send my son to school and I stay at home and I hear that he has fallen into a well and drowned. I was the teacher in charge and responsible for them. When I found out what they were doing, I called all of them and I talked to them and I told them the dangers of what could happen. I said, if you just jump in on your foot, just barely slip, and you fall into that well. None of these boys up here can save you. Right? 20 feet down, what are they going to do? And furthermore, you might break your neck on one of the rocks as you fall. They said, yes, teacher, they understand and they are not going back. Shortly after that, I discovered that they are still going. Right? I called all of them again and I said, listen, anybody who even crosses the road and I find out, you'll be severely punished. Severely. And I laid out about 5 or 6 punishments that I would levy. At the same time, all at once, upon them if they cross the street to go over there again. Right? Thankfully, this... Well, childism, what? Thankfully, the threats that I made were so harsh and severe. I said, I promised them that anybody who go, one of the punishments I said was that you would not go for PE for 6 months. Now, going for PE for them was like going to heaven. Because they could go on the field and run up and down and play football and whatever. I could see them sometimes sitting down and moping and wishing they could go across there, but the threat was greater than the reward. And so that stopped them from going. Now, let me ask you a question. My punishment upon them, was that the real consequence? Was the punishment the real? Let me rephrase the question. Why did I impose punishment upon them? Was it because I wanted them to suffer and was it because I was angry with them? It was, I was trying to protect them. But in their eyes, teacher was being hard and difficult and unfair. Right? They saw the punishment that I was imposing upon them as the problem. Whereas what was the real problem? What was the real problem? The real problem was the danger that they were exposing themselves to across the road. So I had to put a punishment. They saw the punishment as the problem. But I, who was wiser and who knew better, I knew what the real danger was. The danger wasn't the punishment, right? If I take a belt and beat them, the licks would cool after a while. But if they fell into that well, that would be it. It was the same thing that God did in the Old Testament, right? If you broke the law, God was not angry that you broke the law. God was trying to teach the lesson that when you do this thing, the danger of sin, the danger of being separated from me is so great that it will cost you your eternal destiny. And so God put a punishment to deter them from doing it. Not because the punishment was the problem, it was what he was trying to keep them from. He was trying to teach them a lesson that would have an even greater meaning in the antitype. In the antitype, if you are separated from God, it will ultimately lead to what? What will it lead to ultimately? Your eternal death and destruction. Nobody can succeed if they are separated from God. It's impossible. So what God was doing was crying out to them and saying, come to me, stay with me because I'm the only chance you have. Not because God needed any worship or any affection or any adoration from them. He was trying to protect them and save them. And so, the same thing was true for keeping the law. What did keeping the law signify in the antitype? If breaking the law was separation from God, what did keeping the law? Being joined and connected to God. And that's why in the Old Testament there are so many promises that says, if you keep my laws and my commandments and my statutes, then will I set you on high and I will... Great promises of what would happen. Because what God was saying to them now, if you stay connected to me and join to me, it's the only chance of success that you have. The only chance. And so he says, I'm wrapping up. In Proverbs chapter 14, verse 34, he says, righteousness exalteth a nation. In the Old Testament, how did you show that you are righteous? By obeying the law. In the New Covenant, what is real righteousness? What is real righteousness? Christ in you. The living law inside you. And Christ in you now means you're again what? You're again joined to God. So wrapping up. Righteousness, being connected to God again, being joined to God, is the only thing the Bible says that can exalt a nation. To exalt means to do what? To lift up, to raise on high, to help that, to achieve full potential. Righteousness, connection to Christ, being joined to Christ. And that is why Jesus came and he said, abide in me. And again he says, without me you can do what? Nothing. So the lessons are there in the Old Testament. If we understand certain things, we can put them together and join them and connect them.
We have a country that had more church per capita than anywhere else.
Well, but that is the point I was...
Christian country.
Yes.
We are the highest murder rate in the world.
Well, that is the point I was making, that a lot of people can say it with their mouth. With their mouth. But in their hearts, they say there is no God. Right? So righteousness, being connected to Christ, being rejoined and fixing that barrier that was between us and God, it is the only thing that can exalt a nation. And that is why at the end of the day, only one nation will survive. And what nation is that? The nation that is joined to Christ. All the kingdoms of the world will be judged and they will be destroyed in the bottomless pit with the beast. But one will last, because the only thing that can make a kingdom and a people and a universe fit for survival is righteousness, which is connection to God and to Christ. And the opposite is true. It is a fool, and it is the biggest fool who lives his life and not acknowledge this person. So, I'm going to stop here because I don't want niggeritis to kick in. And I know it's almost 1 o'clock. But I just want to encourage us in closing that even Christians, even us who are children of God, sometimes we live our lives and we forget that the master of our lives must always be Jesus. And we make decisions. It happens to me. There are days I go through the day and I don't remember abide in me. I make my own decisions. And those are the days that I make mistakes. So we have to abide in him and not be fools. So thank you for your participation. I could see that you were all paying attention, even though some of you are tired and hungry. So I appreciate that. And I want to say welcome to my young sister here, even though I don't know her. Sister Ima is not a visitor, so I don't need to say welcome, but welcome anyway. All right. I'm going to ask us to stand, and if there's a suggestion, we can close with.